Victoria International Airport is the 11th busiest airport in Canada, with more than 1.9 million passengers a year. But when the pandemic hit, the impact was massive. Countries closed their borders, lockdowns were put in place, and people stopped flying. YYJ went from seeing 100 flights a day to as little as 8 flights a day. Here to talk more about the future of travel, we're joined by Geoff Dickson, President and CEO of Victoria Airport Authority. Geoff, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
So going from 100 flights to less than 10 a day, that's a huge jump. What sort of impact did COVID-19 have on the airport?
It was staggering to Victoria International Airport and, quite frankly, staggering to the aviation industry globally. Effectively, all our revenue is tied to the movement of planes and people. And when you have a decline like that, and it was actually 98% decline in passengers in the month of April, you can only imagine what the impact was overall on our revenue.
We've never seen anything that has had this sort of impact before. I mean, 98%, that's a huge number. You know, shutting down the world and basically putting a stop to travel. So how did you deal with it? How did the airport respond?
Well, the first thing you do is you put a hold on all capital projects. I mean, whatever wasn't related to safety or was substantially complete, those projects were stopped. We immediately looked at all our operating expenses, because when your revenues are down that much, I mean, you can't remove cost at that rate, but we have an onus to cut costs as aggressively as we could. We ended up cutting our costs 27%, which is pretty significant. But one thing we're very proud of, I went to our board of directors right away and said, look, the last thing I would do is lay off people in terms of a cost-cutting measure, and we've managed to come through the pandemic, or almost through the pandemic, without laying anybody off.
Yeah, that sort of brings us to today. You know, we've been through a lot, but restrictions are finally starting to loosen. The world is slowly starting to open back up again, and people are finally thinking about traveling again. What is passenger activity like at the airport today?
Well, today is good. I mean, we're a far cry from 2019, but when we look at the numbers, and we track it daily, we're trending at about 25% of 2019. And I use 2019 pre-pandemic. We had a day, Sunday, earlier this week, where we did 3,000 passengers, which was as high as 50% of a typical day. Typically, we'd move 6,000 people a day through the airport. And on the Sunday, we moved 3,000 people. We're going to start to see it continually increase. And I expect by the year end, we're going to be up around 60% of pre-pandemic levels.
So going into this summer, are there any new flights that we can expect?
Yeah, actually, there's a lot. And what we've seen is new service from Kitchener, Waterloo, new carriers coming in, Swoop and Flair, providing ultra low cost service, which is fantastic. We have new flights to Ottawa, to Winnipeg, to Saskatoon. So essentially, you've got all the major Canadian cities covered. And once the U.S. markets and international markets open up again, we'll see. Swoop has already announced new service to Las Vegas coming this fall.
So say I'm planning on traveling. What can I expect when I get to the airport?
Well, if you can expect it to not be as busy. You're going to see a lot of plexiglass. You're going to see everyone still wearing masks, and that's something that we are mandating through the airport and onto the plane and while you're in flight. You're going to see temperature checks done at pre-board screening. And you're going to see distancing markers throughout the airport. You're still not going to see people meeting and greeting in the airport. We're going to open that up in August. And right now, for anyone coming to pick up at the airport, our short-term parking lot, the gate is up and it's free. And we're not going to start charging our dollar parking until September.
Yeah, and it's not over just yet. We're sort of in a bit of a transition phase. What's your advice for safe travels, and what changes should passengers be aware of?
Well, I think you just have to give yourself a little bit more time. Try and check in at home if you can. If you've got a bag to drop off, get there a little bit earlier. You're going to have to give yourself a bit more time to get through pre-board screening. It just takes longer to process passengers with the temperature checks.
You've mentioned that you've had to, change the way you do things. So there's now hand sanitizer at the doors. There are new touchless technologies. Do you see any of these sticking around? Any longer term changes coming out of the pandemic?
I do. I think you're going to see more and more shifts to as you identify, the touchless technologies. There's technology today where you'll have a permanent bag tag, for example, and that stays with you forever, and you just get a different QR code every time you check in with an airline or book. And so that will be coming, I think, eventually. You'll see self bag drop where you don't necessarily have to liaise with a check-in agent. You'll just be able to go and self check-in, drop your bag off. I see more biometric facial recognition technology coming in. You know how you present your boarding pass and ID at the gate to board? It will just go to more of a facial recognition, I believe. And then the big thing that governments around the world are wrestling with right now are health credentials. Will there be some kind of electronic health passport? I'm not sure about you, but if you've had your vaccination, it's probably on a piece of paper and not that sophisticated. I think we're going to have to find little better ways to get our digital credentials in place that we can carry with us, and countries around the world can have some certainty, including Canada, that anyone coming and going is fully vaccinated.
Geoff, now here's the big question that everyone's sort of wondering. When do you see international markets opening back up, and how long do you think it'll be before we see the same amount of people flying as we did before the pandemic?
I think you're going to see a gradual reopening of the U.S. border first, and I would suspect that could come by the end of August, and I would think that would be for fully vaccinated Americans coming. I think you'll see the restrictions lifted on the 4 designated international airports, that is Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, and Montreal, that are currently the only 4 designated. You'll see that lifted to the other airports that have been receiving U.S. flights, i.e. Victoria, and I think that could come sometime in September. And to your last question, in terms of when do we see full recovery, well, our models have all shown 2023, 2024 full recovery. But I have to tell you, the United States, over the July long weekend, they had some days where they actually exceeded pre-pandemic levels. So it may come back much quicker than we think.
I think people are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and are now starting to entertain the idea and think about traveling again. It'll be interesting to see where we go from here, because there's definitely an appetite out there for travel. Thanks for taking the time, Geoff. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me.